Well, here we are. RFK Jr. could be the next head of the HHS if confirmed by Congress. I've made several videos over the course of this YouTube channel documenting his lies about vaccines, but how bad would he be as head of HHS? Let's ask history. So to answer how bad having RFK Jr. as head of the HHS could be, I want to talk about a story, and I promise it connects back to RFK Jr., but this story is about AIDS in South Africa. And it's one of how science denial in South Africa led to about 330,000 preventable AIDS deaths in South Africa in just 5 years. In the 1980s, South Africa had just a few isolated cases of HIV/AIDS, while America was dealing with an AIDS epidemic. Fast forward to 2015, and South Africa has 6.4 million people infected with HIV. Now, back in the 80s and early 90s, HIV/AIDS was practically a death sentence. If you were infected, it was only a matter of time before your immune system was totally devastated by this virus, and you were left vulnerable to lots of infections that would otherwise be no big deal to a normal person, but to someone with HIV/AIDS, it meant a slow and painful death. But after a long and complicated road, scientists all over the world working together developed drugs that could prevent HIV from replicating in human bodies, thus essentially curing HIV/AIDS. These were drugs that would target the unique proteins and enzymes that HIV needs in order to replicate. So it was like hitting HIV with a heat-seeking missile while the rest of your body was unaffected. And these drugs worked by targeting multiple different sites on the same enzyme or multiple different proteins within the HIV virus, so that mutations in one protein that led to resistance of one drug didn't affect the other drugs. They were still able to bind and destroy the virus. Using these drugs in combination means that HIV can't mutate fast enough to resist all of them at once, and thus HIV becomes not an issue for the body. And it did turn AIDS from a practical death sentence to a livable condition. This was an incredible win for science and for humanity, and it meant that millions of people didn't have to suffer and die from a disease that was so horrible. But then in 2000, President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, held a meeting of 30 different scientists or doctors on the topic of HIV/AIDS. Many of the people he invited to this meeting were known HIV/AIDS deniers. Yes, that's right, there were people in this world, and still are people in this world, who think that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. And they think that the drugs that turn it from a death sentence to a livable condition are actually poison that are killing people. We just can't have nice things. Sounds a little bit familiar to what some US senators and governors were doing during COVID. Anyway, following this meeting, Thabo Mbeki, who already kind of subscribed to these ideas, implements policies that are only best described as HIV denial policies. Because he thought that HIV didn't cause AIDS and that the drugs to treat HIV/AIDS were poison, he took away funding from clinics that used antiretroviral therapies to treat HIV. He also limited the use of drugs that were donated by pharma companies to South Africa to help combat HIV/AIDS. And then the person he appointed as health minister, who was Monto Shabalala Simang, promoted herbal remedies like garlic, beetroot, and lemon juice to treat AIDS. It didn't work. And so this denial of HIV/AIDS and restriction of the drugs used to treat it led to an estimated 330,000 people dying between 2000 and 2005 of preventable AIDS deaths. And it made a whole generation of AIDS-afflicted children, because in case you didn't know, HIV can pass from mother to child if the infection is not controlled at the time of pregnancy. This all hits very close to me because my father was born in a country called Swaziland, which is currently known as Eswatini, but it's a tiny landlocked country in between South Africa and Mozambique. And Swaziland is the most AIDS-afflicted country in the world. I've been there, I've seen and met AIDS orphans. These are children whose parents both passed away from HIV/AIDS. My granny, when she was alive on her farm, used to send these kids to school and feed them and get them to their doctor's appointments. But it's just really, really sad that all of this suffering is preventable. And in the case of South Africa, it was caused by this denial of evidence-based medicine. And just to be absolutely clear, this whole idea that HIV does not cause AIDS is cartoonishly silly. There are several things in science that are shrouded in mystery and are exciting and on the cutting edge and things we don't know so well and are actively studying. The question of whether or not HIV causes AIDS is not one of them. It's very well documented and demonstrated both experimentally and clinically that HIV binds to a receptor on a particular cell type called CD4 T helper cells. Once it binds to these receptors, it enters the cells and inserts itself into the cell's genome and also will kill CD4 T cells. If you mutate either the receptor on the cell or the protein that HIV uses to bind to that receptor to not be able to interact anymore, then you don't get HIV infection and you don't get destruction of those CD4 T cells. And of course, in humans, if you block the virus's ability to replicate, then you don't get AIDS. You reverse AIDS. Hence, HIV does cause AIDS. So eliminating the virus eliminates AIDS. HIV causes AIDS. So again, it's just blatant denial of reality and denial of science that is being propagated and spread by people who stand to benefit either monetarily, politically, or personally in some way from spreading this misinformation and gaining the trust of powerful people like the president of South Africa. For example, one of the people in that meeting of 30 scientists that Thabo Mbeki convened was named Peter Duesberg. He was a real virologist who did actual good work, but he thought that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. He even went on Joe Rogan's podcast to talk about this. So he got very popular championing this idea that this genuinely devastating virus is actually nothing to worry about, and we don't have to use quote-unquote poisonous drugs to treat it. So how does this all relate to RFK Jr.? Well, first of all, the Peter Duesberg guy I just mentioned, RFK Jr. calls him a hero. Yep, he is listed in a list of medical heroes in RFK Jr.'s book about Anthony Fauci. He even spends hundreds of pages supporting this idea that HIV doesn't cause AIDS and that the drugs used to treat HIV/AIDS are poison. To him, it's all a scam because Anthony Fauci and the NIH needed HIV to be a virus that causes AIDS so that they could be relevant and make money somehow. That's his conspiracy. So that's the first connection. RFK Jr. subscribes to these exact same ideas that caused the needless deaths of at least 330,000 people in South Africa in the span of 5 years. And he calls the people responsible for the policies that led to those deaths heroes. And the second connection is that now Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to do things like take away federal funding to schools that require vaccines for children to attend them. Similar to how Thabo Mbeki took away funding for clinics that used drugs he thought was poison based on no evidence. So RFK Jr. has a very similar playbook of science denial when it comes to vaccines. And he promotes several people who are directly responsible for medical travesties and tragedies in the past. If you want a more thorough rundown of RFK Jr.'s history when it comes to vaccines and what he actually believes, then I recommend you go watch this video here. It already did all the work of documenting all of the lies that RFK Jr. has told over the past 20 years about vaccines, what he's said to try to wriggle his way out of those lies, and also documenting the evidence against those lies. So I highly recommend you go check it out. Okay, pause. Hi, Future Dan here. I filmed this video like 2 weeks ago and I'm almost done with it, but just this morning I saw this on the news and I just had to mention it here because what I've been talking about in this video is already happening again with a new science denial government. People who need HIV medication are being denied their medication that they need to live a normal life. And I want to be clear that this isn't necessarily caused by RFK Jr., but if he is confirmed and he's not confirmed yet, it's going to get worse. These are the kinds of ideas he supports. And how is it medical freedom to deny people the medication that they need? That is the opposite of medical freedom. So please just understand that this is really serious. This is inexcusable. And all the people who have supported RFK Jr. are saying that he cares about health and is going to fix public health, you are partially responsible for this because this is what you voted for. And I'm talking to all the influencers and so-called public health commentators, people like Theo Vaughn, the Paul brothers, Joe Rogan, Vinay Prasad, Jay Bhattacharya, Marty Makari, Kaylee and Cassie Means. You people are just advocating for these kinds of things to keep happening. Why are you doing that? Just how do you justify it? I cannot believe that I'm already seeing this. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this because it's really important. So now back to the video where I'm more calm. But the point I want to really emphasize here is that we should not sane wash people like RFK Jr. Implementing policies based on science denial is not going to end well for the people, and RFK Jr. will have a lot of power to implement a lot of policies that do just that if he is confirmed by the Congress, which he probably will be. And it doesn't matter if it's bad for you and me and the regular person, because people like Peter Duesberg has never faced any consequences for his actions. He got to remain a professor. He never received any recompense for any of his denial. And Thabo Mbeki, similarly, never received any consequences for his actions. He doesn't even express any remorse for them. In fact, Thabo Mbeki is on record responding to critics of his HIV/AIDS denial policies, comparing his critics to the tyranny of apartheid Africa. And he claimed that he and other dissidents would be burned at the stake in previous times. So essentially, he was complaining about being a victim of tyrannical forces that want to silence him while his citizens died needless and painful deaths. Cool. So yeah, we could very well be looking at a public health disaster caused by RFK Jr.'s policies over the next 4 years. And I just wanted to make this video to point out this reality and make anybody and everybody aware of just how bad RFK Jr. will be for public health. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting. The links to all the science that I talked about in this video are in the description below so that you can check them out for yourself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.